Next is the affirmative recross-examination of negative. Mr. Albrecht, you have 10 minutes to recross-examine Turretinfan. You have 10 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Turretinfan, does Christ use the Greek word poimene for any of the other apostles in telling them to lead his flock? I'm specifically referring, so that you won't get lost, I'm specifically referring to John 21 and the usage of that term.
John, you're referring to John 21:15, and you're referring to
the Greek word poimene. Does Christ use this Greek word for any of the other apostles, of course, in telling them to lead his flock?
Let me
rephrase
it.
Okay, you got it. Okay.
I'm not sure that Christ personally uses that. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that it's possible, Turretinfan, that Christ would allow Peter, or even a successor of Peter, to bind a lie in heaven?
I don't believe that the way it works is Peter binds something into heaven. I think the way it works is Peter reveals the truth of the gospel from heaven and explains the way of salvation. I think that's the way to read the text.
So Matthew 16:19 should actually be read. Heaven is actually giving the information to Peter, or whatever Peter says, it's not going to be ratified by heaven. Then, so I guess the plain reading of Matthew 16:19 is not correct. Am I right? Is that what you're asserting?
I'm not asserting that the plain reading is not correct. What I'm trying to explain is that my understanding of the verse as a whole is that what's being disclosed here is how Peter liberates people from the gates of hell. And the way that he does that is by proclaiming the gospel. And Peter has those keys of the kingdom of heaven that permit him to do this. Those keys are revelation from heaven.
Does Matthew 16:19 specifically mention the gospel?
When you say, does it specifically mention it, you mean explicitly mention it?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, I don't believe it explicitly mentions it.
Okay. Did Peter, being a sinful man, would that prevent him from being infallible ever? Being a sinful man, would that prevent him from ever being infallible?
His being a sinful man,
yes,
can prevent him from having a natural characteristic of infallibility, but it doesn't prevent the Holy Spirit from speaking through him.
Perfect. And you do not think that the Catholic Church believes that he has a natural characteristic of infallibility, do you?
I know for certainty that that's not the official teaching.
Okay, great. Okay, let me, I guess my next question will be a little simpler. I remember earlier I was bringing up John chapter 21, and I was talking about a number of fathers that interpreted it. I was looking through a little list that I made a little while ago, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but are you aware that every single father that does indeed interpret John 21 interpreted it as Peter being the chief shepherd? Are you aware of that?
There's no way I could be aware of what every single church father what they
said.
The
ones that reference this passage specifically.
And who have extant works, and I suppose there's
right.
limitation further that they're translated in English, or
they don't definitely need to be translated in English. There are a few of them that in fact you can only find in the Ming.
I would be speculation on my part to say that I'm aware of something like that.
Okay.
I mean, it would be inaccurate to say I'm aware of something.
I understand. Okay. I'm going to go right back to something we were talking about earlier in Galatians 1:18. I remember briefly touching upon that, and I want to ask you one more time. In Galatians 1:18, Paul goes to visit Peter, to see Peter. And I believe you disagreed with me. You pointed out that this term, storicide, appears only here. And I just want to be sure. I want to be certain. I don't want to make any assertions that are incorrect or misrepresent you. But you do not believe that I'm correct by saying that this Greek word means that Paul went to visit to learn and to be taught and to get information from Peter. Am I correct? You do not believe that this Greek word carries that connotation with it, do you?
Well, the word that's translated "see" there could have a variety of possible meanings. The way I would interpret that word is in the context of verse 19, where it says, "But other of the apostles saw I none, save James, the Lord's brother." And in that case, he uses a different word for "to see," which then helps us to figure out what sense he meant in verse 18, because he's using a different word.
That's perfect. I'm glad that you brought that distinction up, because even John Chrysostom brought out the distinction, and I guess I'll ask you the next question: are you aware that of exactly why that distinction is made? The Greek word specifically, I believe, "heiden" is used as opposed to the Greek word "historicei." Can you tell me? Am I
aware of the reason why the Holy Spirit inspired Paul to write with those particular words?
Well, no. Could you tell me exactly why one Greek word is used, and right next to it a different word is used? He uses a different word to see Peter, and I'm arguing that this word carries with it the connotation of visiting, to learn and to be taught from. Obviously, I believe he's been visiting him to be taught and get information from. My question is, why do you think that a different Greek word is used right next to this word?
Well,
if it's such a simple word.
Of course, some of it's going to involve me speculating about why the Holy Spirit inspired Paul to write
let me rephrase it. I'm not being clear enough. Let me rephrase it. Why doesn't it just use the same Greek word for visit, for see? Why not the exact same Greek word for see, if the Greek word historicei did not carry any significance with it?
The one possible explanation, and again, like I said, some of this involves speculation. One possible reason for having a second word is to help explain the first word.
Perfect.
In other words,
okay, go ahead.
In other words, it's frequently done in Hebrew, which of course is Paul's background, is that you say something with one word and then you say the same thing using a different word. And by doing this, you have what's called a Hebrew parallelism, which helps you see the meaning and the relationship between those two words. They have a common trait to them.
Turretinfan, does historicei mean that Paul visited Peter so that he could learn about the faith, so that he could get information from Peter about the faith, and none of the other apostles, specifically Peter in this passage? Does it mean that here?
No. He says at verse 12, that's one thing we can interestingly rule out. He says in verse 11, he says, well, I got to go back to verse 10. He says, "For do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I yet pleased men, I should not be the servant of Christ. But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ."
Well, I'm not specifically talking about the gospel. I think you're going a little bit off topic. I'm not even confining myself to saying I know exactly what he learned or what he was taught. I'm simply asking you, does this Greek word mean that he visited Peter to learn and to be taught from him, to be taught something of the faith? It doesn't matter what it was. I'm not referring specifically to saying it would have to be the gospel. I'm asking, does this mean that?
As I just tried to explain to you, in view of the fact that verse 19 has a parallel word which doesn't have that type of connotation, and the context says, "But other of the apostles saw I none," that word "other" helps to inform us as well that he's drawing a parallel. And in view of verses 11 and 12, then I think it would be presumptuous of us to assume that there was an educational reason for the visit, as opposed to a fellowship reason. He was only there for 15 days.
Turretinfan, are you aware that the Freiberg, the Louw-Anita, the Liddell Scott, the Thayer, and every single lexicon or dictionary that mentions this verse mentions this as being that he visited to learn and to be taught from Peter? Are you aware of that?
Well, what you're doing is confusing the role of the lexicon with the role of the...
Okay, well, how about a dictionary? Okay, how about a dictionary?
There's a range of meanings. Yes, there's a range of meanings that's assigned to the word, and it's a word having to do with to know or to see.
Okay, I suggest that maybe perhaps after the debate or in a bit, I'll send you a little bit of research. I don't believe that I'm confusing the lexicons or their purpose. I do believe that these do show that this means that he visited Peter to visit, to learn, and to be taught from. But I guess that would conclude my cross-examination period, and I guess we'll move to the next section of the debate.